Hello and welcome to CorpusCast. You're listening to the podcast all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. Each episode, we'll explore how the study of language in large corpora is used to tackle challenges in the world relating to education, health, and technology, among many others. So, sit back, relax, and join us as we discover the ways in which corpus linguistics is shaping the future of the study of language. I'm your host, Robbie Love, and I'm a corpus linguist at Aston University. Now, before we get started with today's interview, we were excited to announce recently a collaboration between CorpusCast and Sydney Corpus Lab, which is led, of course, by Professor Monica Bednarek, who was our guest from our last episode of 2022, talking about TV, dialogue, and screenwriting. So if you missed that episode and you're interested, then please do look back through our archives and you'll find that episode number 12. Now, at the Sydney Corpus Lab, for each month of this year, they are publishing a blog with the answers of previous CorpusCast guests to our quick questions section, which of course is a set of questions that we ask our guests at the end of each episode. So if you're interested to revisit some of the responses from previous episodes from 2022, then do check those out as they come out each month at sydneycorpuslab.com. Now, to today's episode, we're talking about the applications of corpus methods to the study of political discourse, a very important area of research, of course, that investigates the language of governments, politicians, and political organizations, the language of people who have great power over large populations. The language that they use, of course, matters, and the analysis of this language can reveal strategies for reinforcing that power and encoding their ideological stances on important societal topics. So to help us navigate through this fascinating topic is my guest today, Dr Kwabena Sarfo Sarfo-Kantankah, Associate Professor of English and Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. Dr Sarfo-Kantankah specializes in political and parliamentary discourse using methods and frameworks from corpus linguistics, discourse analysis, and pragmatics, and has published widely on political discourse in both the Ghanaian but also the UK parliamentary contexts. And you can find his work published in journals such as the Journal of Pragmatics, Language, Discourse and Society, and CADAD, Critical Approaches to Discourse Analysis Across Disciplines. So it's a great pleasure to introduce to CorpusCast Dr. Sarfo-Kantankah. Kwabena, hello, thank you and welcome, and thank you for coming on CorpusCast. It's great to see you.
Hello, Robbie, good to see you too, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. We've never actually met in person before.
Not at all.
But I became familiar with your work in recent months, and really was really interested to hear more about what you're doing. So we'll start by talking, as I do with all of my guests, a little bit about their academic journey and interest in corpus linguistics, and then we'll get into really how you're using those methods to inform your research on parliamentary discourse. So with that in mind, I'll start with the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what does corpus linguistics mean to you?
Thank you very much, Robbie. Well, let me go this way. Assuming I want to study some language phenomena, then I have gathered my data, of course, naturally occurring data. And I look at my data and I realize that it is so large that I can't manually read through to identify the phenomenon or features that I want to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And so I process the data, I put it on my computer, and I say, hey, I have a software program that I can use to manipulate the data using my computer so that I'll be able to identify the features I'm looking out for. So basically, that is what corpus linguistics means to me, that I gather my data, I can't read through manually, I use my computer with a software program, and I'm able to manipulate the data to be able to identify the things I'm looking at. So I'll contrast that, for example, with a manual way of reading and examining text.
So it's essentially a means to an end of dealing with working in discourse contexts where there's quite a lot of language data occurring that you want to study, and I'm sure that is absolutely the case with parliamentary discourse, which we'll get onto in a moment. But I want to sort of dive a little bit into your own academic background and your journey, I suppose. I say this most episodes, people aren't usually born aspiring to be a corpus linguist or a discourse analyst that uses corpus methods. They clearly learn about it somehow, some way. How did this happen for you? Was it when in your sort of educational journey did you first become aware of corpus linguistics, and how did you become interested in approaches?
Thank you very much. I did my undergraduate studies in the University of Cape Coast, the Department of English where I teach right now. And I did my Master of Philosophy, that's an MPhil, in the same department. In the course of doing the MPhil program, I was somehow introduced to the idea of corpus linguistics, but that wasn't detailed enough. So I remember at a point in time applying for an MPhil program at the UCL, London, that is University College London. Mm-hmm. I remember I got the admission to work under Gerard Nelson.
Okay, yeah.
I got the admission, but I couldn't get funding. And at that time, I was interested in doing corpus linguistics anyway, but I didn't know much about it as I do now. So I couldn't go to UCL. And after my MPhil, I got appointed in the same department as a lecturer. So I taught for some time, I think for about 4 years, and I got admission to the University of Leeds on Leeds International Research Scholarship. And I got the opportunity to work under Dr. Alison Johnson. So, Alison was also into corpus linguistics. I had the idea of working with Ghanaian and UK parliamentary data. So when I got to the University of Leeds, the idea of corpus linguistics came in strongly. And so I started reading around it. Alison took me through aspects of it. And then David Wright, you mentioned not long ago, also took the opportunity to take me through. So it was at that time that I began officially to deploy corpus linguistics in my studies. And then 2013 when I went to the UK, the University of Leeds for my PhD. And somewhere June 2014, I also got the opportunity to go to a seminar at Lancaster University where McHenry and Baker, Professor Paul Baker and Professor McHenry, they organized a seminar on corpus linguistics. So I attended the seminar. At the time, Richmond Sadiq Ngula was there as a student. So I joined him, and that was a time I once again confirmed that, yes, it was something that I wanted to do, that I developed a stronger interest in corpus linguistics. So basically, that is how come I got involved in doing corpus linguistics.
That's great. You mentioned a couple of people there actually that I want to pick up on. We did have a quick chat, of course, before we start recording, and we established that we do have at least one person in common, even though we've not met ourselves. And that, as you mentioned, was David Wright, who was doing his PhD at Leeds at the same time as you. And David Wright is someone I've known for probably about the same length of time. I probably was about the same time that I first met him. We've gone on to work together on a research project. And you also mentioned Richmond Ngula there, who I remember fondly from Lancaster, because we had the same PhD supervisor, as you mentioned, Tony McHenry, who was a guest on CorpusCast a few months ago. And I believe that Richmond actually is now a colleague of yours at Cape Coast. Is that right?
He is, but currently he's on leave in the University of Botswana.
Ah, okay.
Yes, and he's he's been there for about 2 years now, and he's supposed to be back this month.
Ah,
so we are expecting him.
Oh, great. Well, yeah. When you do see him again, tell him I said hello, because I'll do memories of our time there. So you sketched out your journey there, really, and your PhD project, as you mentioned, was interested in parliamentary discourse, comparing Ghanaian parliamentary discourse to British parliamentary discourse. We'll get into the sort of specifics and maybe the differences and similarities between those two contexts in a moment. But to start with, on a broader level, what is it that interests you about parliamentary language, parliamentary debates? What was it that got you interested in that in the first place?
Well, thank you. I have interest in politics because I feel that politics decides everything for me. The water I drink, the quality of air I breathe, the food I eat, everything, virtually everything is determined by politics, because it is a politician that makes the laws, and we are supposed to abide by those laws and live by them and all that. And so, yes, so I'm interested in what politicians do. And if I'm interested in what politicians do, one area that I'm so much interested in is the parliament. Because for the three arms of parliament, I feel that, three arms of government, I feel that parliament is the most important, because it's parliament that makes the laws, and the judiciary will interpret the laws, or, if you like, implement. It is parliament that has an oversight responsibility over the executive to make sure that the executive does the right thing and all that. So I see parliament as the most important. And it is parliamentarians that represent me directly, if you go by democratic principles. And so if they are those representing me directly, and I should know who they are, what their mindset is, what they think about me, and what they think about the people. Well, how do I get to know them? I need to study them. And to study them, I feel that the best way to study them is to study their language, because by their words we shall know them. So they need not come to tell me who they are and what they stand for, because they will always tell you positive things about themselves. But if I take the opportunity to study their language, and I examine and I find out, and in an exploratory way, what they stand for, then I can understand what politics is all about far, far better than if they come to tell me. So for me, it is about studying their language and getting to understand their discursive practices. We're looking at what are the linguistic issues and the sociocultural issues that are important to them, and those that are important to the people. So I'm so much interested in the discursive practices of parliamentarians, because they stand for me and they represent me, and what they decide is the most important when it comes to the public good. So that is why I'm so much interested in what parliamentarians do and more generally what politicians do. And yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so because of that, I got interested in studying the Ghanaian parliamentary discourse for my PhD. But Ghana's democracy is modeled on that of the UK. The oldest parliament is a younger democracy modeled on the like of the UK. And so when I started the work, I realized that was there anything we could learn from the UK practice so that it can inform the Ghanaian practice, or vice versa? Because the UK, even though is very old, is a very old parliamentary system, the oldest in the whole wide world, it is still evolving, right? So you can also learn from the Ghanaian part, and then we can see how the two parliaments can inform each other in terms of their discursive practices. So I got interested in looking at the two at the same time for my PhD, and then after that, publishing on some of them. And now, of course, if you are looking at some of the similarities and differences, I guess you ask something like that. Yes. For similarities and differences between the UK and the Ghanaian parliament, we can look at it from two sides, both linguistic and non-linguistic. Okay. From a linguistic perspective, I would normally say that they are similar, more similar in terms of how they design their questions. And in fact, I can confidently say that in the parliamentary questions, there are no genuine questions. And that goes for both parliaments. Questions in parliament, both in the UK and Ghanaian parliament, are designed as to provide information or give opinions, or sometimes even hint at their own answers. Those ways of asking questions actually go against the rules of parliamentary questions. So in both parliaments, when you read Eskime, the most authoritative treatise on parliamentary practices, it talks about the rules of questioning and the fact that questions are supposed to seek information or press for action. They are not supposed to express opinions. They are not supposed to insinuate. They are not supposed to be rhetorical. They are not supposed to suggest their own answers. But that's exactly what the MPs do, both in the Ghanaian parliament and the UK parliament. So the way they design their questions is very similar. And then one other thing, there are several things, I'll mention a few of them. One other thing I gathered, in terms of politeness marking, you see that in the UK, there's a more conventional way of marking politeness, an indirect way. So, for example, somebody will say, can the Prime Minister respond to this question? But when it comes to the Ghanaian context, it looks like politeness is marked more by lexical form. And that actually comes from the second language context. In the classroom situation, we are told that if you want to be polite, you use the past forms of the model. So instead of can, you say could. Instead of will, you say what. Okay. And so it looks like in a very formal context, that is always what the MPs are using in the Ghanaian context. So even when will is fine enough, they'll use the word because thinking that they are in a very formal context. So when you use a corpus approach and you search through the use of the modal auxiliaries, you realize that in the UK you have a lot more will than word, a lot more can than could, and in the Ghanaian context it's the other way around.
Okay.
Oh yes. So Ghanaians are using more of word as against will, more of could as against can. And so that is one linguistic phenomenon that is so clear in the data. But of course, yes. And then, in Parliament, there's a lot of sensationalism, they argue, and therefore they use a lot. There's a lot of intensification. All right, because if I'm arguing against your stance in Parliament, how do I emphasize my stance? How do I emphasize my point? So you realize that very often there's a lot of use of intensifying adverbs, and if you like, intensifying adjectives. And you realize that in the use of language, the UK MPs use more complex forms of intensifiers, like adverbs such as extremely, absolutely. But in the Ghanaian context, you see more simple forms, just a very.
Okay.
So yes, so you find very in the Ghanaian context more than any other adverb, if you like. And when they want to emphasize strongly, you can see something like very, very. So when I examine the data, I realize that when a UK MP say extremely sad, a Ghanaian MP is likely to say very, very sad.
Okay.
Yes. So there's all these indications of a second language situation and a first language situation, and the ability to change word forms, to the availability of a lot more choices for the UK MPs than the Ghanaian MPs and all that. So that is also another linguistic difference that you can find between the UK MPs and the Ghanaian MPs. So of course, apart from the linguistic form, there are other non-linguistic forms. One thing that interested me most, what I was happy about, or whether that I was amazed at, in the course of my research in the UK, I realized that at a point in time, the then Speaker of Parliament, is it John Bercow?
Yes, at the time, the Speaker of the House.
Yes, had described the behavior of the MPs as public school twittishness. and that actually struck my attention. I was like, that's a very old Parliament if MPs could be described this way.
Yeah.
Then what is in there? And I realized that actually even the people of the UK were not happy even about the behavior of MPs on the floor of Parliament and all that. So I decided to also look at the Ghanaian context and see. And you realize that in a way, the UK Parliament appeared to be a little rowdier than the Ghanaian Parliament. And this is the reason. In the Ghanaian Parliament, anytime there was a question, for example, that flouted the rules of questions, as according to May's rules of questions, somebody will stand up and say, that is against the rules. Or sometimes the speaker will say, that is against the rules, so rephrase the question. But you wouldn't find that in the UK context. So it appeared as though in the UK context, the MPs had the free will to express themselves, and people could jump in and shout at each other and then say whatever. But I also thought that it was there because of a practical reason. Sometimes, if you intervened all the time asking people to rephrase their questions, it delayed the process. For example, question time, Prime Minister's question time is only about, 30 minutes or 1 hour? So you want to hear a lot more people speak.
Yeah, fairly short. Yeah.
Very short. So I thought that was also could be the reason why MPs were allowed that kind of room to operate and say what they wanted to say and all that. And then the one other thing was that they also talked a lot more about unemployment, both in the UK and the Ghanaian context, unemployment. And then they were always talking about the people, classifying people into groups, classes. And when it comes to the differences, you realize that the UK had a lot more, a multi-layered classification of the people than their Ghanaian counterparts. So in the UK, you will see that they will identify subclasses of the people and link specific needs to these groups, which actually I realized emphasize the welfare system that the UK operates. But in the Ghanaian context, it appeared as though some groups of people in the context of parliamentary discussions were overlooked. So, yes, so I thought that was very significant. So, for example, in the Ghanaian context, pensioners, old people, elderly people, vulnerable people wouldn't be seen to be talked about. But that was very clear in the Ghanaian, in the UK context. So there's a lot more that I could find in terms of the differences and all that. But because of the time, maybe we can end it here. But maybe going forward, the question will be how we're able to arrive at some of these things through the corpus approach.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I think it's really good to get a sense of the similarities and differences in the context here. One thing I did want to ask you to help paint a picture in my mind is the British Parliament is quite sort of infamous, I suppose, for having a very kind of adversarial layout where political opponents literally sit facing opposite each other and literally argue over a massive table, essentially. But, a lot of other parliaments around the world take on, I don't know the exact word for it, but it's a lot more of a cooperative sort of layout where everyone's kind of sitting side by side in a sort of semicircle arrangement where, yes, they're still disagreeing with each other, but they're not literally opposing each other. Where does the Ghanaian parliament layout kind of fit within these different models? Is it modeled from that kind of adversarial British structure, or is it something else? Because you're right that the UK parliament is known for being quite rowdy and lots of jeering and clapping and booing and almost kind of pantomimical sometimes. Maybe that's partly to do with the fact that they're almost encouraged to do that.
Yes.
Press up against each other.
Yes. The seating arrangements for the UK and the Ghanaian parliament, there's a little bit of difference. But in terms of the adversarial nature, I don't think there's so much difference. You see, the Ghanaian one is arranged in a semicircular form. But the majority on one side, the minority on the other side. So the majority on the right side of the speaker, the minority on the right and the left side of the speaker. But the majority sit in a semicircular form. The minority also sit in a semicircular form, but they sort of face each other. But in the UK context, it is more directly the government MPs and opposition MPs facing each other more directly, like two sides of a rectangle.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So yes. So they face each other more directly than the Ghanaian one. But in terms of the adversarial nature, I don't think there's so much difference. It all boils down to the management of the procedures, the management of the talk, of the debate on the part of the speakers. That is where the difference I think comes in.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, this is CorpusCast. We're here to talk about how corpus methods are used, and I'm familiar with the UK context in that accessing the what will become linguistic data is usually in the context of parliamentary debates done through access to public records of transcribed sessions in what's known as the Hansard. The transcripts are produced by staff who work at the parliament. And for linguists, okay, they don't get so much control over the transcription because they generally are using transcripts that someone else has produced. But it does make it relatively easy to access the transcripts of the sessions of the debates that you're interested in. How does that work with the Ghanaian parliament? Is that a similar kind of situation, or did it work a bit differently when you started researching in that area?
Yes, it's similar. I use the Hansards. You know, these are, according to them, record of the proceedings of Parliament. That is the verbatim record of what transpires on the floor of Parliament. And so, of course, you know, I read a paper, that's the hazard of Hansard. I think I've forgotten the author. Somebody did a study on the UK Parliament. I was talking about the hazards of the Hansard when you are using it for your study as a linguist, because it is not produced for linguistic studies. There are certain things you cannot find in there. And of course, also sometimes there's an opportunity for the transcribers to edit the language. And I realized that sometimes there are certain words that can be replaced, even in the context of transcribing what the MP say. So you need to be careful how you use it. The Ghanaian Parliament uploads the Hansards on their websites. Previously, they didn't. So when I was in the PhD, I had to go there to collect the soft copy from them.
Really?
Process, yes. And so they uploading them on the website of the Parliament it was a recent phenomenon. I think coming from somewhere 2016, 2017, when they started uploading it on the website. But previously, if you needed the soft copies, you had to go to Parliament, ask them to give it to you. And that's exactly what I did for my PhD. But of course, in the UK, you know, they started, even 1604, they put information on their website. When I'm searching and looking for Hansards on the website of the UK Parliament, I could find data up to about 1604. You know,
yeah.
And I was very happy about that. Okay, so you can go to the website and download as many as you can. But of course, when you are going to compare, it means you have to look at the range. If you have a Ghanaian data starting from, say, the 90s up to, say, 2014 or 15, it means you are more likely to also collect data from the UK between that period and all that. So it can be comparable and all that. So yes, the Hansards are the ones I use for the study. But of course, when you download the Hansards, you have to take it through a lot of, and that's the most difficult part of the work. You know, for corpus linguistics, the most difficult part is the data collection and processing. If you collect your data and process and you finish, the rest is easy to do. It's easy to manipulate the data. So there are several things you have to do with the data. There are parts that you need to delete from some that there are pictures in there and all that. So you have to go through each of them one after the other, delete the parts that you don't need, and then process it into text files or some other form that, say, Westmith tool or some other corpus linguistic tool or software can manipulate. So it's a whole process. But basically, I use the Hansards from the UK and from the Ghanaian Parliament.
So, but when you sort of the idea that you came to Leeds, started your PhD, and then a moment of realizing that you need to actually go in person to the Ghanaian Parliament, but this was before, as you said, before they started putting their Hansards on the website. Was it simply a case of just going and you said you went and you obviously had to ask for permission? Was there a sense of, well, what do you need it for? Was there any kind of suspicion or, you're going to criticize a language or tell it what we're doing wrong? Was it just like, yeah, sure, take what you want? Or did you have to kind of reassure them that you weren't, that you were going to only do certain things with it?
Yeah. Of course, I took permission from the University of Leeds. I had to go through quite, I would say, tedious process to seek clearance to be able to come to Ghana to collect the data. If your data involves human subjects and all that. I need to justify why and all that. So I did all that. So with the letter from the University of Leeds, and I had also sent an email to the editor, the one who was in charge of parliamentary debates in Ghana, telling him about what I was doing. And then with the support letter from the University of Leeds, when I came down and I explained things to them, it was easy for them to give it to me. Of course, if you go to Parliament to buy, for example, the hard copies of Hansard's, you can easily get it to buy. So when they understood that it was for academic purposes, well, of course, initially they will ask questions. There were questions about what I was going to use it for and all that. And so with the evidence of me being a PhD student, and that was my focus of study and all that, and then the assurance that, of course, that was even going to inform Parliament itself about their own practices and all that, they were forthcoming.
Okay, that's good. That's good. You mentioned earlier, of course, some of the broader linguistic differences between the Ghanaian and UK parliaments. But of course, in the more recent years, you've focused more exclusively on the Ghanaian parliament, and I suppose looking at some of your recent publications, using approaches from critical discourse analysis combined with corpus methods, often known or as part of a family of approaches known as CADS, of course, corpus-assisted discourse studies. A recent publication in the CADAD journal that I mentioned earlier caught my eye, looking at how Ghanaian parliamentarians discussed gender-based violence, because of course looking at this sort of discourse, parliamentary discourse, gives you the opportunity to explore all sorts of different topics, because that's, of course, the purpose of Parliament. They're discussing all these different issues. So you publish on, how they're discussing quite a range of different topics. And as I say, one that caught my eye was a recent publication about gender-based violence. I wonder if you could say more about what you're interested in looking at there and what you found.
Thank you very much. As I said, if you're looking at the discursive practices of parliamentarians, as you rightly said, you have a wide range of topics, thematic areas you can look at. And so sometimes the way to decide that is to explore the data, allow what is described as a corpus-driven approach to tell you what is in the data so you can explore. For example, for the PhD, that's what I did. When I gathered the data from the UK and Ghanaian parliaments, I was like, okay, so what am I specifically looking at?
Yeah.
So I have the data, I've collected it. And then the question is, so what am I going to look at? And so this is where the idea of a corpus-driven approach is very key. And then using the keyword approach, I was able to identify some focus and then explore. But quite more recently, sometimes you see what informs some of the topics I look at is the currency of issues. So, in a Ghanaian context, gender has become a very topical issue. It's become one of the issues we are looking at currently. On the back of, for example, the LGBTQ issues, gender has become a very important topic in the Ghanaian context. So the first paper I looked at in terms of gender was, from there I'll come to the one you mentioned, the gender-based violence. The first one I looked at was the discursive construction of gender that is looking at men and women in the Ghanaian parliament. So I wanted to see what MPs thought gender was all about and what they thought of men and women in the Ghanaian context. And I realized that in the Ghanaian context, so I gathered all the data, all the Hansards from 2012 to 2020. I didn't leave any. That is one of the advantages of using the corpus approach. So what I did was to explore the use of gender, the use of women, men, female, male, these key terms, explore the data. And then what I realized was that anytime the MPs use the word gender, they were referring to issues affecting women. Gender actually in the Ghanaian parliament means women and their issues. It's about the world of women, not men. Okay. And then they ascribe certain cultural practices to men, some to women. So if you come to the Ghanaian context, for example, there's a lot more masculinity assigned to men and more femininity assigned to women. So when it comes to some jobs such as the forces, the military, the police, and the allied agencies and all that, it's like they always link to men. And then when it comes to other forms like household chores or chores and what have you, it's more women. Okay, so I realized that MPs differentiated a lot more between men and women, assigning, of course, that was informed by Ghanaian cultural practices, where women, in terms of gender, are assigned specific roles and men assigned specific roles. So when I looked at that, I got an interest to look at more other features. And of course, recently, there have been arguments about the passage of legislation in support of an affirmative action, where women will be given a lot more space, a lot more political space, a lot more opportunities in all facets of society. And so one of them has been, there are groups that have been fighting for a legislation on gender-based violence. So after reading some of these things and listening to radio and all that, I thought that, well, it will be very interesting to look at what MPs thought about gender-based violence, because their mindset and how they felt about gender-based violence will inform the kind of legislation they will pass. So I decided to explore what MPs thought. And actually, what I found out was that gender-based violence was actually an issue of women and not men. And so whenever MPs talked about gender-based violence, the issue of men never came in at all. And so it appears as though men were not, if you like, at home, at work, and anywhere. And when you talk about gender-based violence, you are talking about violence against women, violence against children. And so they talked about gender-based violence in three ways. The forms that they thought were there. So, for example, they'll talk about child abuse. They'll talk about things such as child labor. They'll talk about rape. They'll talk about wife beating and all those kinds of things. And then they will normally talk about the victims. And the victims of gender-based violence, by what we find out, the victims are actually women and not men. So, yes, you will never see a Ghanaian MP saying, per the study, that when we are talking about victims of gender-based violence, we have men. Even though in recent times, there's evidence that men have also reported cases of, if you like, domestic violence against them, gender-based violence against them and all that. And so, and then after that, they will talk about the way forward to fight it. And so they'll normally talk about stronger legislation, the implementation of the laws, and stiffer punishment against people, and then education and all that. So we saw three thematic areas of talk around gender-based violence in the Ghanaian parliament. And as I said, if you are talking about gender-based violence in the Ghanaian parliament, you are talking about violence against women and girls and children and not men or boys. Okay. And then we are looking at how to fight it and all that. So that is something that I found. And I thought that, well, if that is what the feeling is, then perhaps when we are passing a law, it's more likely that we are going to overlook the aspect where men also suffer gender-based violence and domestic violence and what have you. So this is something that perhaps we need to have a look at.
But from what you were saying as well, it seems to be omitting or at least backgrounding the role of the perpetrators of the violence, which is overwhelmingly done by men, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So actually, the assumption is that, albeit indirectly, they say perpetrators are men and not women. That's exactly what the data that we examine exposed using the corpus-assisted approach.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for talking us through, the process as well, which of course is, so much of what we're interested in beyond the topic. As we start to wind down here in our conversation, I want to sort of zoom out a bit. We mentioned it earlier on your colleague Richmond and Gula, who will hopefully be joining you again at Cape Coast soon. Also a corpus linguist. Could you say more about the role of corpus linguistics in research and teaching at your university at Cape Coast?
Great. I am enthused about the interest that people have developed here in Cape Coast over the period. Some of us started doing corpus linguistics not long ago. I would say about 6-8 years ago. And we started teaching it officially in our department not long ago. But when I see the interest that our postgraduate students have developed in corpus linguistics, it looks very great. The future looks very bright. In 2018 and 2019, 2018 to 2020, I became the head of department of my department. That's the Department of English, University of Cape Coast. And having interest in corpus linguistics, I took steps to establish a corpus linguistics center.
So brilliant.
Yes. So I bought a number of computers. We got a space for it and all that. So, but after 2020, I left office. So the one who took over from me also started working on it. We are still working on it. We are not done yet. Of course, perhaps I have thought that if I were still there, we will be done by now. But the process is still ongoing. And it is my hope that very soon we will get a corpus linguistics center. And I'm happy that there are colleagues even outside my department, some in social sciences, who have read my work, and they come to me and they are happy and amazed at the methods I deploy in my analysis. That's the corpus methods, and they want to come and learn it from me. And so when I see that a number of colleagues have approached me to take them through the corpus linguistics approach, because they feel that it can be used in other disciplines other than language and linguistics. And so, yes, we are pushing the agenda of corpus linguistics. If we were able to establish the center, we will be the first to have had that in Ghana. And so we have spoken with a number of people all over Ghana, those in other universities who are ready to come to us to explore ways of using corpus linguistic approaches in their work and all that. And in fact, in 2020, we had a workshop. We have a Linguistics Association of Ghana, and of which we are members. If I say we, I mean myself and Ngula, Richmond. And we led that discussion. Ngula and I led a seminar and took the association through corpus linguistic methods. We had over 48 slides, and we talked about, all the aspects and the applications and the tools and all that. And people were very happy about what they saw and heard. And so I think that going forward, we have an opportunity to be the first in terms of approaches to corpus approaches to the study of language in Ghana.
Brilliant. That sounds fantastic. I wish you all the best as that continues to develop. It sounds like you have some very exciting plans. And just, we can add it to the pile of evidence all over the further spread and development of the interest in corpus linguistics. And as you said, the applications of these approaches in other disciplines as well, which is obviously something that we've seen happening over the last many years. We'll start to wrap up now. I'm going to bring us to our quick questions segment to finish the episode. As always, 3 quick questions. We'll see how quick the answers are too. Are you ready, Kwabena? Are you ready for quick questions?
I am ready.
Good. We're nearly there. Here we go. Quick question number 1. What is the biggest change you've noticed in corpus research in your career?
Okay, thank you. Reading from books, when I started looking at corpus linguistics, we got to know that it started long ago, long before, but in different ways. From, if you like, the days of Franz Boas, the American linguist and all that, coming to Chomsky's time and all that, and developing. And then in the 60s, coming when the idea of the computer came in, and then the development became a little bit faster. But within the last decade, when I read around, I Google and I get to know the rate at which corpus linguistics is growing, I am amazed.
Yeah.
It is so fast in terms of the areas, the disciplinary areas. It started as a purely language issue, a linguistic issue, but now it's gone beyond that.
Yeah.
It's gone into social sciences. As I told you, there are colleagues coming to me and all that. And so sometimes I feel that we may not go far with the idea of corpus linguistics because that limits the idea, but maybe we should begin to describe it more as corpus studies, so that it can incorporate the idea of all kinds of disciplines, because the corpus linguistics seems more like limited in an area. You're doing linguistics. But obviously, the corpus approach has grown beyond just linguistics. It has gone into other areas. So perhaps we should be talking more about corpus studies rather than corpus linguistics and all that. So that corpus will be just a part or some field of corpus studies and all that. Just like discourse analysis and discourse studies, So I think that the growth is phenomenal. And as I said, in terms of even geography, before I left for the UK, that's in 2013, we didn't know about corpus linguistics in Ghana in terms of people doing corpus linguistic studies and publishing them. We didn't know. And so the publishing in corpus linguistics is just a recent phenomenon in Ghana. I think Angola, that's Richmond, as I mentioned, and myself and few other colleagues. So I can confidently say, starting from 2013-14 coming, and within the last few years, when I returned, say from 2016 coming, so roughly within the last 6 years, we've had a lot more people doing corpus linguistics in Ghana.
Yeah.
And then when you Google in Africa, you can see that people are now becoming more and more interested in corpus linguistics. So sometimes when I sit down, I feel that, well, it looks like the manual way of examining language and linguistic phenomenon is gradually going to die out, and corpus linguistics is going to take over going forward. Because that's how I feel. Because, in research these days, what I see is that researchers are more likely to generalize their findings. When you're able to generalize your findings, that feels more fulfilling. And if you want to generalize it, it means you need large volumes of data to be able to generalize your findings and all that. How do you do that? To do that, you need a corpus linguistic approach. And then when I search around, a lot more corpora are being built all around the world, including the second language situations like Ghana. The ICE project, International Corpus of English project, is still ongoing.
Yeah.
So I can see, and people are building their own corpora. I know a friend here who completed, in my department, did his PhD. He's now teaching at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. He used a corpus approach. He actually recorded classroom lectures, transcribed, and used a corpus approach to study some linguistic phenomena in the data. And that was in my department.
Yeah.
So you can clearly see the phenomenal growth of corpus linguistics taking place all over the place. And that's why I feel that going forward, it looks like it is going to upstage the manual way of examining linguistic data or language data.
Well, you heard it here first, a CorpusCast exclusive. Is it corpus linguistics or should it be corpus studies with various branches, including corpus linguistics is one of them? That's a wonderful prediction. We'll see. Okay, quick question number 2. What is the biggest misconception of corpus linguistics that you've encountered?
Well, thank you. I think the biggest one is people who don't do corpus linguistics think that it is devoid of context.
Okay.
The contextual properties of data. I remember I did a presentation here, and one of the works I spoke about, the discursive construction of gender and women and men and all that. And I did a presentation in my faculty. We usually have a faculty seminar series. So at a point in time, I did a presentation, and one of the questions that came, and I tried hard explaining it, some people still didn't agree, that where was the context if we were looking at the data that had been stored in a computer, and yet we are saying that the language must be naturally occurring. And if it's naturally occurring, context is very key. And people feel that, yes, when you are doing corpus linguistics, it is devoid of context. You don't have the context, so interpretation becomes too dry, kind of artificially constructed. And I said, no, I disagree. That's a big misconception, because when you are doing corpus linguistics, we have corpus internal data and corpus external data. The data, for example, if I'm looking at parliamentary discourse, parliamentary hazards, like the gender-based violence I spoke about, the corpus internal data will tell you what MPs talk about. But of course, the debate was also held in a certain context. And we have other publications, we have other legislations about gender-based violence, we have people who spoke about radio discussions and all that. And you put the data within that kind of context, and you realize that actually the context is there. And even within the corpus internal data, you see, you have access to the larger data. And so you can see what everybody else says about the same thing. And when they are talking about these things, sometimes they provide certain contextual properties that will let you understand the context in which a certain word or is being talked about, or a certain phenomena is being talked about. So it is the biggest misconception that I've ever come across. And I think, but it doesn't, of course, if it's a misconception, the answer is clear. It means it's not true.
Indeed. No, I think that's a very it is a very good point, because it is often I suppose an accusation, if you will, that corpus linguistics pulls things way too far out of the context, and therefore is there, what is the validity of the work we're doing, especially with spoken data? I mean, that is still a real methodological challenge of how do we keep in mind how far away from the original speech signal we're taking in the process of transcription, for instance, among other things. Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, we will wrap things up there for this episode of CorpusCast. This was really, really fun and really interesting to learn about you and your work. Your really important and very interesting work in parliamentary discourse, and a real pleasure to have you on the show. And of course, a pleasure, I hope, for our listeners and viewers to hear all about political discourse and Kwabena's research at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. So thank you for joining us. However you have accessed us, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the others you know by now. Why not subscribe on YouTube or Spotify, however you access CorpusCast, and chuck us a good old 5-star rating while you're at it. Do let us know your thoughts about this and any other episodes in the series using the hashtag CorpusCast, and make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics research group on Twitter at Aston Corpus, and you can follow me at Lovermob. CorpusCast is an Aston Originals podcast, written and hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by my excellent colleague, Sam Cook. So thank you for watching and listening. And of course, thank you to Kwabena Sarfo Sarfo-Kantankah. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure too. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And congratulations to you. Thank you very much. I think what you are doing is so great. It will give a lot of people the opportunity to understand what corpus linguistics is all about. And so kudos for a good work done.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.